And welcome to this 20th anniversary celebration of the Center for Global Trade Analysis and the GTAP project. Really glad you could join us on a rainy Monday. And I'm Jay Ackridge. I'm Dean of the College of Agriculture, and it's a real pleasure and privilege to introduce this event and to just make a few remarks on behalf of the college. We got a lot of special guests here today, but I want to mention a few. I know Mike Brzezinski is here, the Dean of our International Programs at the university, so very pleased Mike could join us. Also, Arden Bamet, who's Director of the Global Policy Research Institute and our Chief Global Affairs Officer for the campus, and Angela Diaz, who's the Managing Director of the Global Policy Research Institute. These folks are all great partners of international activities in our college, and just really glad you could join us this afternoon, and let's give them a round of applause. I'm going to be brief because we've got a great panel here that's going to talk a bit about the past, present, and future of the Center for Global Trade Analysis, but just a few comments. I was reviewing some of the materials that Tom sent me in terms of timeline for the center and decided I might have had a little bit of a role in this. So some of you may know that I was one of Tom's first graduate students, and I was working on production economics, okay? And it looks to me like not too long after I finished up, he changed direction and focused on trade. So I'm not sure. I'm just saying. I don't know if I had something to do with that. But anyway, again, it's a pleasure to celebrate the Center for Global Trade Analysis this afternoon. And I think that's the first point. Is one of congratulations to everybody who's been involved in this activity. You know, if you're around an academic enterprise, you watch sort of the life expectancy of centers, and it's usually not too long. I mean, startup funds get used up, and the center kind of goes away, or you know, the individual who really gets the center moving and decides to pursue a different path and/or leaves the place, and you know, again, the center just again dissolves. But to celebrate 20 years of a center that's grown and had the kind of global impact is something that's truly special. And everybody that's in this room, and many of you have been involved in this, should feel very, very good about what you've accomplished with respect to the Center for Global Trade Analysis. So, you know, thinking a little bit about that success from an external standpoint, you know, a lot of these things start with a really good idea. And I think that's what really was the impetus for the Center for Global Trade Analysis, the idea of the need for a common data set, a data set that had credibility, that was validated, tools that individuals could use, I think was certainly something that was a convening mechanism and helped this center get launched. But, you know, to think about surviving, thriving, expanding for 20 years, and I guess from an external perspective, again, it's this commitment to continuous innovation that's really kept the Center for Global Trade Analysis moving forward. And I think you see that in so many ways. I mean, the staffing, I think you may have had the first research professor in the college as part of the center. The funding model and putting together a consortium of individuals, users that supported this. Certainly continuing to expand the kinds of research that this unit does. The development of models that took advantage of the data sets, the commitment to continuing education and helping users around the world better understand how to put this tool to work. I mean, all of these things, I think, in my mind, are innovations that helped the center continue to survive and thrive. And I think that commitment to innovation is one that's going to keep it viable and important as we look to the future. So again, these are things to celebrate, I think, today on this 20th anniversary. The last point's really sort of around this idea of international engagement. And everybody in this room knows that we're celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Morrill Act this year, the legislation that really helped establish places like Purdue and sort of started us on this path for this tripartite, you know, research extension teaching mission. And I think all of us, again, especially in this room, know that scope is no longer limited to local and state boundaries. I mean, the problems we address, especially in the College of Agriculture, they're global in nature. And so we need to be engaged globally to really do relevant work. Having said that, in a resource-constrained world, I think all of us are left, well, where? How do we engage internationally? And where does a university commit resources to do something that truly moves, again, our understanding of a particular issue forward? And in my mind, you know, the Center for Global Trade Analysis is one great example of that, because I think you're building on the public policy tradition of this department and this college, the Alternatives and Consequences framework, that we look at policy issues. So there was a tradition here. We're thinking then about, again, taking the next step with respect to driving that and to adding on modeling perspectives and again, building on the data sets and, again, expanding, again, this tradition of public policy work, the area of becoming a convening mechanism and a facilitator, something that leverages resources, deeply engaging stakeholders around the world. I think all of these are elements of some of the things that have made this particular way of engaging internationally important and again viable for the past 20 years and again set the stage for the future. And really last couple of quick points. I just see Gabisa Jetta in the back of the room, and he was last week at the Borlaug Dialogues as part of the World Food Prize, and I was there as well. And you know, an event like that, you listen to what's said and what's not said, and lots of focus, of course, on production and how we produce enough food to feed 9 billion people by the year 2050. Some discussion around post-harvest issues. How do we, again, preserve food? How do we reduce waste and food loss? Not so much discussion around policy. Okay, Bob Thompson's presentation, you know, on Friday, of course, an exception to that. But I think all of us, again, in this room understand that the policy environment that, again, we set up globally within countries, within regions, is going to have a major effect on our ability to feed a growing world population. And the work that this group does in helping us understand, again, policy in a global context becomes fundamentally important, in my mind, to again, supporting the great production work, the great work on post-harvest issues as we think about meeting that challenge. And final point is really around communication. I think, you know, helping the general public understand the science that a place like Purdue does and a College of Agriculture does is not a small challenge today. You know, there's a pretty big disconnect between what the public maybe understands and appreciates and really what we do as scientists on this campus. And that's absolutely true in the policy world as well, because the tools you've developed, the analyses that you do are so sophisticated anymore, there's a disconnect between the public's understanding of that and, again, the quality of the work that we do. And so GTAP, in my mind, becomes another mechanism for bridging that gap between very sophisticated and increasingly sophisticated policy analysis and, again, helping the public understand the consequences of these policy choices and, again, in the spirit of the Alternatives and Consequences model. So a couple of points maybe looking forward that, in my mind, again, have set the table for an even more prominent next 20 years for GTAP. So, again, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I think we've got a great panel. Unfortunately, I've got to run to another event, but I appreciate the chance to just offer a few words of welcome and congratulations. Thank you. And now I want to turn it over to Terry Walmsley, who's Director of the Center for Global Trade Analysis, and she'll be moderating our panel this afternoon.
My apologies. Thank you very much for coming to today's event. It's looking like a wonderful panel here that we're going to hear from. I just wanted to, before we start, the Center for Global Trade Analysis is basically the home of a very large global network of about 10,000 people from about 150 countries around the world. It's very much a global network. And as a result of being so global, we couldn't do what we do without this global network. And we have several visitors here in the front that I wanted to introduce to each of you, just to emphasize the fact that, that the GTAP database is this rather large global network, and these people have contributed over the years to the success of the GTAP project. So I wanted to start with Marina Sigas. Marina Sigas is from the USITC, the US International Trade Commission in Washington, D.C., and he's one of our Hall of Famers. About several years ago, in 2007 I think it was, we decided we needed an award which symbolize the network, how good some of our network contributors are, and the fact that many of them have been here for 20 years contributing to GTAP. And Marina is one of our very first Hall of Fame winners. There's only 5 of them, and Marino is a great asset in the GTAP network. He contributed to the original GTAP book, and since then has used it very widely. So we're very pleased to have Marina come and join us today. Thank you, Marina. The next one I wanted to introduce was Judy Connor. So Judy Connor is... put your hand up. Some of you will actually recognize Judy Connor. Judy Connor was the original program manager from way back in the beginning. If Tom is the father of GTAP, Judy is the mum. And she has been involved in all the courses and all the events right from the beginning, and set up a lot of all the conferences and courses and the administration and the database sales. She was the mum we relied on. So thank you for joining us, Judy. Our third visitor is Bettina Dimaranen, and she's currently at IFPRI. And we welcome her. She was the program manager. She also worked at GTAP many years ago, not too long ago. And we consider her still she's definitely part of the family. And she's the one who took the GTAP database construction process and really made it flexible so we could add more countries. So you've seen it grow from 15 countries in the beginning right through to 129, which we have now. And a lot of that flexibility and the management of the database, turning it into a professional management, was down to Bettina. She's also done a lot of research on baselines in China with Will Martin at the World Bank. And now she's off in IFPRI working on a rather large capacity building project in Africa with IFPRI. So we're very pleased that she could come along. And we also have Everett Peterson from Virginia Tech, and he's here today to join us as well. He is responsible for a lot of the agricultural disaggregation in the GTAP database. There's a couple of new databases globally that are coming up, and they don't have the agricultural data that is required by a lot of our network members. So it's wonderful that he was able to give us the agricultural data help us build the agricultural data into the GTAP database. So thank you, Everett, and thanks for joining us. So I simply we just wanted to make sure that you realised how important our network was to us in terms of courses and education and the database. We wouldn't have the database that we have without our network. So I would now like to turn to the panel discussion. We're very fortunate to have 4 very distinguished speakers to discuss basically the role of international outreach at Purdue, and perhaps talk a little bit about what GTAP has done in that. Our first speaker is the Interim Provost Vic Lechtenberg, and since 2002 Vic has led Purdue's engagement and outreach efforts to government agencies, corporate leaders, schools, communities all across Indiana and the world. And we're looking forward to hearing his thoughts on international collaboration. Thank you. Actually, do you want to speak from here? Yes. No. Or maybe you can turn the microphone.
Well, good afternoon. Congratulations to Tom and all the GTAP staff. It seems like only a few years ago that we created GTAP, and I can't believe it's been 20 years. I actually was there when it came into being, and I'm tremendously pleased to have the opportunity to participate a bit in the dialogue this afternoon. I was thinking over the weekend and reflecting a bit on the comments and the notes I would are some key points I wanted to leave with you today. And one of the questions I asked was, why does an institution like Purdue get involved in something like international efforts, international education, international research, international policy? And I've identified what I think are 4 reasonable justifications for us doing this sort of thing, and I think certainly typify Purdue's history and international engagement. And one of those is, it's just the right thing to do. To help other people, it's part of our DNA and heritage that was created by the land-grant university Morrill Act of 1862. And I had a chance recently to, I'm going to digress this, I had a chance recently to speak to a couple groups about the history of Purdue. So, there have been a couple young groups that thought I actually knew John Purdue. I'm not quite, so I've had to disabuse them of that. But the Morrill Act really was a remarkable piece of legislation, and I think probably the most revolutionary, save perhaps the GI Bill, in our history. And what it really did was created a mechanism whereby higher education would address relevant problems. Therein is the justification, I think, for us to become involved and to be involved in what we do today internationally. The Morrill Act didn't say anything about international involvement. It was not something high on the radar screen of the policymakers in the country at that time. But it did talk about relevant education and about access to high quality education by sons and daughters of working class people, working people. Industrial classes, I think, are the words that were used. Over the years, a lot has been accomplished, and that has attracted a lot of attention from institutions and countries and nations around the world, and they have emulated the land-grant university system that we have in this country. So I'm proud of our international engagement and tremendously pleased that GTAP represents one of those successful international involvements. Another reason I think it makes sense is that it helps us enrich the curriculum for our students and our faculty. And again, probably not something we worried about 100 years ago, but we do worry a lot about it today, particularly in a global economy and a highly networked, horizontally organized versus compared to vertically oriented architecture and higher education and in business and industry. A third reason is very clearly when we do this, we enhance the brand image of Purdue University, and that's important to us as well. And a fourth that's kind of come on our radar screen recently is that I think Jay mentioned the thousands of people that we have around the world who have degrees or connections to Purdue University in some way. Increasingly, we're seeing ways in which those relationships can be leveraged economically, and we've got some really good examples right here in our own community. As I've thought about Purdue involved internationally, I'm thinking about 3 different phases in our history. Shortly after World War II, it seems to me, was kind of the first phase. I don't believe we had a great deal of international engagement prior to that time. But the GI Bill, as I mentioned, was a fundamental, I think, revolutionary piece of legislation, and that put a lot of returning veterans into college, into graduate school. Many of them had connections in countries around the world where they had served. The educational systems in these countries were in a shambles for the most part, and there were a number of one-on-one faculty relationships and partnerships that evolved during that time period that really drove the degree to which Purdue was involved internationally. I remember being in Japan a few years ago with the governor on a trade mission, and a gentleman came up to introduce himself and told me about his experience in coming to Purdue in the mid-1950s, maybe it was the early 1950s, to study at Purdue, and then went home and became a leader in, I believe it was in chemistry. But the reason he came here was because he had befriended or known someone in Japan who was part of the U.S. military or U.S. government at the time. And we've been able to track some of those kinds of partnerships and relationships in other countries in Asia as well as in Europe. And those, as I've talked to people who maybe did know John Purdue many years ago, that those were the kind of partnerships and relationships that evolved initially to get Purdue's name in front of people around the world. Then if you fast forward to maybe 20 years later, in the late 60s, early 70s, the U.S. government began to engage in institution building, and Purdue got heavily involved, particularly in agriculture. And the real leaders in Purdue University in international engagement and development were in the College of Agriculture. We had the first in this college, the first individual identified as a leader or an administrator dedicated to advancing our international agenda. Tremendously successful projects in a couple countries in South America and and in Africa and other parts of the world. And so this college can take a lot of pride in being the leader of that movement or of that international engagement. And it was not until about the late 1990s, as I recall, that we actually had an international programs leader at the university level. Mike is shaking his head. I can't recall for sure when it was, but it was probably 98 or 99 or somewhere in that time frame, close to that. Then another phase I think that we entered into was, I call it the internet phase, or the post Berlin Wall phase, where it became obvious and clear that the world truly was interconnected. And I remember some stories here in the College of Agriculture when I asked questions about how many students we had studying outside the U.S., and the answer I got back was, well, we had 2 last year, and that's the most we've had in 15 years. It was very clear that Purdue was not where it needed to be in terms of these kind of experiences and opportunities for our students. So we, across a large part of the university, have made that a high priority. We've made a lot of progress in that regard. The curriculum has expanded. Now we have what, some 4,500 or more students from other countries on this campus. A lot of undergraduates from other parts of the world. They've changed the nature of the climate where our students from the U.S. study. The experiences they have are certainly much more robust and enriched than they were in the previous generations. We've explored a lot of research opportunities and research partnerships. GTAP is a great example of that, not just with other universities, with government agencies and nonprofits and other entities all around the globe. And these, I think, institutional partnerships, frankly, the ability to form partnerships and to act successfully in these partnerships is the key to, not just the key to the success of GTAP, but the key to much of what we do at Purdue in the future. And then the third phase I would characterize for you is, what are we going to look like going forward? For the last several years now, we've made it very clear that meeting global challenges was one of our strategic goals and objectives. I think of this in about 4 levels. Individual faculty, the thing that got us started initially in the 50s, is fundamental, and we will continue to have individual faculty-to-faculty partnerships and relationships, often based on relationships with former students or former mentors of some kind, and those are highly productive. We'll have other relationships, and do have, where there's a college-to-college level partnership that makes a lot of sense, and we have a number of those now around the globe. Often involve multidisciplinary approaches to doing projects or doing things, or to meeting some of these so-called global challenges. And then we'll have a few, and we've got a couple now, that are more institutional in nature, presidential level kinds of relationships. And we will engage in a few more of those in my view, going forward over the next decade or so. But the reality is, those will only be successful to the degree that we involve individual faculty partnerships and relationships with the institutions with which we're trying to build these linkages. And I think the fourth level of involvement or engagement, or the fourth characteristic that we'll see more of, is more relationships, in some cases with companies, national and international, but where the name of the institution, the brand of Purdue, the relationships that we have with former students and alumni of the institution can be leveraged in some way to develop business opportunities, either in this country or in this state or in other countries. And we're just beginning to explore that idea. And I think that will, in fact, grow some over the next decade. So that's kind of the framework through which I see our, our international involvement and the history of Purdue's engagement internationally. My compliments and congratulations to GTAP. It was one of the original partnerships that helped make it possible to do a lot of these things, and I think serves as a good model going forward. So, Tom, again, congratulations to you and your team. Thank you for the opportunity to share a thought with you.
Now we'll hear from Professor Tom Hurtle, who's the Executive Director of the Centre for Global Trade Analysis and Distinguished Professor in the Department of Agriculture and Economics.
Well, first of all, I can't help but acknowledge again this group, this five sitting right here in front of me, that were key in getting GTAP going when we were putting this together in the garage or in the offices around the 5th floor of Cranert. Judy, Bettina, Marino. Everett was a little bit predated this, but he came in, and Rob McDougall, who came over from Australia. It was great to work with all of you, and yeah, we have a lot to celebrate. I wanted to make a few remarks, really touch on three things. Why GTAP at Purdue? Why was it successful here? Lessons learned, and a little bit on future directions. So, on the why GTAP at Purdue, why did it thrive here? I think the Agricultural Economics Department really is somewhat unique in our profession with this very strong tradition of policy analysis and service that grows out of the land grant tradition that Vic eloquently developed in his remarks. It was evident to me, actually. I was thinking back, this is a kind of a time for reflection, thinking back when I first interviewed at Purdue. I was giving a seminar on industrial electricity pricing in New York State, here in the Ag Econ department, and I wasn't at all sure how this would go over. But the seminar room was full, and the first question came from the back of the room. Carol Bottom, who was very much an outreach engagement kind of guy, immediately was asking about the policy implications, and it led into a very stimulating discussion of that, and it became clear to me that this is a place where policy relevance of the work is important, and it was really that gut instinct that led me to come here, and I haven't regretted it. It's been a great place to do that kind of work, and I think that tradition has played an important role in the success of GTAP. The strong administrative leadership at the university has been another important component of that. Vic early on, Wally Tyner, who was department head, these guys, rather than it'd be very easy to kill a project like this early on. Judy certainly knows that. All the things that the problems we encountered, and rather than letting us stumble over those things, Vic and Wally basically cleared the path and helped us move forward. When we set up the GTAP consortium, in fact, the university had never had that kind of relationship with public institutions before. Engineering school had lots of private sector consortia, but U.S. government, that's 52% overhead. It doesn't matter if the money is just a donation. This was a new kind of relationship. We had to invent that along the way. The research faculty's positions that are so key to this project have been really important. So I think the strong leadership, and that's continued on, Jay and Ken have played that role, nurturing the project, serving as cheerleaders. We're only here today because of Ken's idea that we need to celebrate this 20th birthday. I think it's a great idea, but I didn't think of it. So being cheerleaders for the faculty, that's a great thing, and you don't find that at every institution. So I think those are some of the elements why it's been successful here at Purdue. Some lessons learned, just a couple of things. I'm enamored of this open network model. It has been so powerful, and one which has been really at the core of the success of this project. When we started this, the only global trade analysis projects that were out there were tightly held assets in government and international agencies, places like the World Bank, even the Australian Productivity Commission, where Rob was working. Turned out that that asset was a tightly held asset. When it came time to transfer that information here, the lawyers at DFAT said, well, what can we get for it in return? So Rob had to kind of share the elements of the framework, not the framework itself, with us. But I think this idea that we get more, this is much more powerful when it's an open framework, when people are contribute to it, get back from that. There's so many projects in this area, certainly predating GTAP, and even now we see them millions of dollars put into the project. It goes for a couple of years, and then it turns out to be just a one-off event. So the fact that we started with 12 regions, we're up to 120. We started with a couple of people in the garage, and now we're up to 10,000 people in the network. This open network is a powerful concept, and the university can play a really important role at the center of that. And in fact, I think this comes to lessons for what can the university do in this 21st century era of all the whiz-bang internet stuff, everything moving fast and furious. The role of GTAP as a convener of where these agencies get together and around the board table and talk with one another, talk about future directions. What are the important issues in the future? What can we bring to the table? What can they share? That's kind of a unique position we're in as a university. Most of these agencies are highly competitive with one another, not to mention the countries being highly competitive. When this project started, Japan and the U.S. were kind of in the situation U.S. and China are now, eyeing one another. We were worried, I remember, when I first came here, the Japanese had just started this auto plant. We were thinking, are we all going to be working for the Japanese in 10 years? There was a lot of competition. The international trade folks wouldn't exchange data and information formally between one another. And at the first couple of board meetings, we found a way, in fact, to share that information informally within the consortium, not officially. And that turned out to be a great way of moving ahead. So whereas these large institutions weren't able to do it through their formal channels, when they got to the university, and we held all the early board meetings here, and that was very conducive to this sharing, they were able to share this information with one another and see their common ground and advance the analysis in a way that was very productive. And I think we continue to play that role. The whole idea of the consortium, I think it was Marina was the first one who mentioned this idea. We were trying to think, December 1991, if I'm not mistaken, great idea, but how do we keep this going? And I think Marina said, well, what about a consortium? And lo and behold, that was a great idea. Getting it through the university, getting it through lawyers and these international institutions took months, but now we have 28 members, a steady base of support financially, but more importantly is what they contribute in terms of their data, in terms of their expertise. Marina works at the International Trade Commission. They have probably 24 people who've been to the short course here. They don't all work in this area, but they have been heavy users, but heavy contributors, and always interested in funding special projects that might enhance this network. So very important. The consortium also has, and I encourage those thinking about how to structure these projects in the future. I'm a big fan of this kind of consortium. We're happy to share our agreement with you and our experience, but it's been also critical for guiding the long-run evolution of the project, because no single individual, no department, even no university can envision the way this kind of a project needs to evolve over 20 years to remain relevant. It's really only in this annual board meeting where we're talking about the issues they're facing, how can this framework contribute to that analysis and dialogue. That is what has kept the project relevant and viable over time. And it's evolved a lot. Since its inception as a trade policy project in the days of the Uruguay round trade agreement, that was really when we came of age, it's evolved into a much broader network. We're focused heavily on environmental issues now, climate mitigation policy, climate impacts, other environmental aspects of trade. That evolution has been demand-driven by these stakeholders. And I think that draws us into future directions for this project. It will continue to evolve as long as we listen to those folks and interact with them productively and don't just go in the direction of our own scientific interests. I think we'll be successful. Interestingly, in the last 2 years, really 2.5 years, Nelson Valoria and I have been trying to sprinkle some of this GTAP magic in the geospatial community. As we've started to work more in the environmental issues, we realize we need the geospatial data on land use, on water, on carbon, that data, unfortunately, is also done with one-off projects, and that's an area where interoperability is critical as well. It's not being done in a collaborative mode. Each group has its fiefdom. I just came back from a week in Rome at the FAO, trying to drum up some collaboration there. No, we have our web portal, be in our consortium, and no one wants to be in their consortium because it's FAO's consortium. It's not IFPRI's or the World Bank's. How can they get together? How can they collaborate? And we think that the GTAP institutional model offers prospect there. This is an area where institutional jealousies are also important, unwillingness to share data, unwillingness to compromise. There are high barriers to entry, much like we saw in the initial days of the trade policy work. So I think there are a lot of similarities, even though these are in a way, very different fields. I think the potential with GeoShare, and I want to acknowledge the Global Policy Research Institute for funding an early workshop that really helped GeoShare get launched. I think there's great potential here. Who knows? I mean, Vic, it's another bet. It's another gamble. You made a gamble 20 years ago. It paid off. I don't know, Arden, whether this will ultimately, we'll know in 20 years if it's succeeded. But I think there's potential there. And we have pilot funding currently from the UK and US government. We're trying to leverage Purdue's Hub Zero technologies for this project. I think there's a lot of potential there, but yeah, who knows? But we'll give it a try. I think there is great potential for this kind of a model, institutional model, in other areas around the university, and I encourage you to explore that. We're happy to share our experiences.
Thank you. So next we have Professor Jess Lowenberg-de Boer, who's the Associate Dean and Director of the International Programs in Agriculture. Professor Lowenberg-de Boer has 25 years of experience in agricultural research and outreach and teaching. It's really interesting. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, and congratulations to you, Tom, and to all who've been involved in GTAP. It's a great example of international engagement, and I think it's instructive to think about the environment that GTAP grew up in. International engagement, international activities overall, but especially international engagement, is part of the core competency of Purdue agriculture. It's something that is widely accepted here, much more than our sister colleges throughout the university, and it has been for a long time. If we think back, and my timeline has a few different points on it than the provost, but it follows the same general idea, thinking about in 1952, about 60 years ago, was the first Purdue staff member that went to the Federal University of Viçosa in Brazil. Over a period stretching from the late 50s to, I think, 1973, there were 200 Purdue faculty years spent at Viçosa helping them build up their capacity. And as a consequence, that's one of the best Portuguese language universities in the world, and we still have links with them. So on November 6th, the rector, Professor Nilda Suarez of Viçosa, will be here on campus to talk about further relationships. And one of the things in the notes that the written notes that you shared, Tom, was the fact that universities tend to have a little longer attention span than lots of other institutions. And I think in international, this is one of our key assets, that we care about those long-term relationships. And we can go on through history, the history of the international programs at Purdue. We can think about the West Africa Farming Systems Project started by Bill Morris, another ag economist in the 1970s. Work on capacity building for agricultural research institutions in Burkina Faso, in Niger. All of the work from Purdue Agriculture that went into the CRISP efforts. So Insermill, the work that really helped build careers of Dr. Gabisa Jetta and other colleagues here. The aquaculture CRISP that Comena Cograni has been involved in. Peanut crisp, bean cowpea crisp, or as it's now known, dry grain pulse crisp, and virtually all of the collaborative research support programs that USAID has offered. And more recently, there's been strong engagement from Purdue Agriculture in the Purdue Improved Crop Storage programs, which originally started with a target of 28,000 villages in 10 countries in West and Central Africa. Now we've had activities in at least 31,000 villages, and we have new distributors in Kenya and Rwanda. So growing beyond, much beyond that original goal. Recent work in Afghanistan, helping to rebuild agricultural universities and extension institutions there. And we're very proud of the 60 Afghans with new master's degrees that are back in classrooms in Afghanistan. And there's another 33 more, both master's and PhD students in the pipeline. So a long history, and I just traced out a few points on that timeline. But it's become part of who we are at Purdue. So this question about, well, does the engagement role of Purdue University stop at the state lines? Well, that isn't debated very much at Purdue, although it is in some of our sister institutions in some other states. The Provost Lechtenberg mentioned that the land-grant model has been copied around the world and widely admired. Unfortunately, one of the parts of that land-grant model that has been copied much less than the other parts is the engagement component. As far as I know, the only other country with university responsibilities for agricultural extension work is India. And I don't think it's an accident that both the U.S. and India have had great success in technology transfer, even though we have very different agricultures, very different economies. But we do have that in common. So this engagement component is a key part of that land-grant mission, and the international engagement is a key part of that. So let's think also a little bit about what has made that international engagement possible from an institutional standpoint. And a couple of things come to my mind. One of them is that in the promotion and tenure process in agriculture, we expect faculty to be doing things beyond the United States borders. We expect international engagement, that in our disciplines, that distinction between national and international reputations has become really blurry. If you're known as a great economist or agronomist or whatever you are in the United States, it's almost inevitable that that reputation extends beyond the borders. And we've developed the management capacity to support those international programs. And this is one of the things that universities are often criticized for, at having great ideas but not being able to implement particularly well. And we're blessed with capacity that's developed over the years. So in departments, particularly like Ag Econ, where international engagement has been common in the business office. People know, staff know how to deal with these issues. In the ag business office, we have capacity there. In IPIA, we have people who help faculty in terms of managing those kinds of processes. So coming back to GTAP and GTAP's role and place in that history, I think that GTAP is a wonderful example of the kinds of university international engagement that Purdue Agriculture is famous for. It works with many partners around the globe. There's concrete outcomes in WTO negotiations in many places, and drawing resources, both human and financial and other, from many sources. And it's a great fit for an academic environment that there's publishable scholarship coming out of GTAP and a long history of that. On-campus activities that fit very well into an educational environment that lend itself to coursework, to student advising. So a great fit. And I guess I'd like to leave you with a question about the replicability of the model. Is this something that we need to look at more broadly in our university international programs? What role in the growth and longevity and success has played by leadership? Clear role there. Tom and others have played. How much was it a unique time in history? You mentioned there were things happening with other trade analysis programs that GTAP was able to come in, step in and fill a gap. And are there things about trade that is trade analysis that's unique? That means the consortium model works better there than it would elsewhere. And I don't know the answers to those questions, but I think we need to ask them as we go forward. So thank you again for this opportunity, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker is Professor Ken Foster, the head of department at the Department of Agricultural Economics, and Ken also has a wealth of experience in international research, having worked in Latin America, China, Africa, and in many countries as well. So thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Terry. And the beautiful thing about being last on the program is that pretty much everything's already been said, so I can be a little bit more extemporaneous. Tom did mention that that this celebration today was a bit of my idea, and what happened, a few of you have heard this story, but I feel like I should tell it because I think it's relevant. A few weeks ago, I was told I have 2 minutes to meet with incoming President Mitch Daniels and tell him about our department. And so I started thinking about, well, there is absolutely no way I can tell him about our department in 2 minutes. So what can we tell him about? So of course we have fantastic students, so I spent a little bit of time talking to him about the accomplishments of our students, both while they're on campus and after they leave. And then before I went, I walked down to Megan and Ginger's offices and I said, you guys have something that I can show to Governor Daniels to talk about GTAP and its influence from, and so they gave me a whole stack of things to pass on to him. But as I looked through them to prepare for that, I noticed that GTAP started in 1992, so I thought, well, here we are 20 years later, we really should celebrate that. So two things about that. One, I guess just from my perspective, that I think GTAP is a wonderful part of our department, integral, something that I thought was worthwhile, and its impact across the world worthwhile raising in front of Governor Daniels, given that opportunity. The other thing was that I thought GTAP was already here before I came. I've been here for 22 years. I came in 1990, and I remember when I told my major professor, Oscar Burt, that I'd been offered a job at Purdue, the first thing that he did was made a joke about doctors' butts, bottoms, and outhouse. And then the next thing that he mentioned was Tom Hurdle. And he said, he says, this guy Hurdle is doing some really interesting work. And, pay attention when you get there to what he's doing. So in my mind, GTAP has been here since before me, but certainly I found out otherwise. I guess I was too busy as an assistant professor worried about my own livelihood to pay attention to when GTAP started. But certainly it's been an incredible organization. So the other thing, when you become department head, you discover that on the shelves behind your desk, your predecessors have left all these little treasures and little nuggets back there. And one of the things that I found on that shelf was a history of the Ag Econ department written by Lynn Robertson, who was a faculty member here many years ago in 1975. So I thought, well, it would be worthwhile talking a little bit about the cradle in which GTAP was born, and Jess and others have mentioned some of that. But I thought, rather than depend on stories that I've heard from other people, maybe I should use a credible source. So I got that document down a couple of days ago, and I started leafing through it. And of course, names like Lowell Hardin pop out, and his involvement. Of course, he started here at Purdue and then moved on to be very instrumental in starting the international research centers that have been great partners with the department and with GTAP. And Bill Morris that Jess mentioned, one of the pioneers really in working in international development in Africa, a member of our faculty. The Brazil project, as it turns out, I discovered in that document 5 different members of our faculty in agricultural economics served as chief of party during the life of that project, and Jess already talked about all the students who came here to study for graduate degrees and went back to various parts of Latin America, spread beyond Brazil before all of that was done. And then D. Woods Thomas, a member of the faculty in agricultural economics, who was the first director of the international programs in agriculture, and now, of course, Jess is serving in that role. So there's a lot of tradition, I think, in this international engagement, this idea that we take the knowledge and the skills that we have developed here at Purdue, and we take it around the world and we share it with people as a big part of the history of the department, and probably a unique aspect of a department. Again, Tom, I think one of the things maybe that made GTAP acceptable here and successful here at Purdue. Then the other thing that I noticed in that document back in the early 1970s was the establishment of courses in international development, international trade, and policy, with the idea not just that we have all these international students coming here for graduate education, but that we have a bunch of people growing up in rural Indiana coming to Purdue for an education that could benefit from the experiences of faculty who have worked in international settings, can bring that experience back to a campus where, having been a student in the late 1970s, the opportunities to travel and to visit other countries were fairly limited. So I think there's sort of 2 big dimensions here to the model that Purdue established back in those days. One is this idea that we do go outside the boundaries of the United States, that we extend the Purdue campus to find good partners around the world, to educate them and to learn from them in a true sort of engagement fashion. And the other is that once we've captured that knowledge, we bring it back here to the students and to the stakeholders in Indiana. So today, you think of people like Jerry Shively and Phil Abbott, Kevin McNamara, John Sanders, Jake Rickard Gilbert, Jess and his role in IPAE, and of course his background in the department as people who are devoted to this idea of international engagement, of taking their experience and their knowledge abroad, and of course all the folks that are associated with GTAP, Tom and Nelson and Terry, that you've heard about, and their work in the international setting. And their continued emphasis on this idea of training people here on campus So the GTAP model is a great model for research, but it's also a great model for training graduate students. And over the years, numerous students, I had the good fortune of having taught most of them in class and served on committees of a few of them, learned a lot of economics and a lot of policy analysis in the context of the GTAP model, in the context of the work that they did with Tom and others through the center. And then they've gone on to places like the World Bank and IFPRI, where they've taken that experience and they've cross-pollinated it with thoughts from other individuals and other universities and institutions, and are really making a huge difference. And a lot of that traces back to GTAP. And if you talk to them, they'll make that connection for you. Today in our graduate programs, anywhere from 80 to 90 students typically in the resident part of the graduate program. And in a normal year, I haven't had a chance this fall to count them up, but in a normal year we have students from 30 different countries. So one of the transitions here is a few students from Latin America to students from 30 different countries in the U.S. It's a very rich environment for students to learn and to build professional networks that last in their whole life, and you never know when you need to know somebody who's from a certain place and has access to knowledge. So just a beautiful melting pot of students, and sort of continuing that idea that we're reaching out. Of course, the short courses where Tom is educating and Terry and Nelson are educating professionals and practitioners in policy analysis, 10,000 member strong network of individuals who either come here to the Purdue campus for short course activities or use the data or the programs or go to some of the short courses held at remote sites. Probably some interesting differences today from maybe that historical perspective are that international activity has become sort of a cross-cutting activity in the department. I don't think there are any members of our faculty in agricultural economics who don't have some sort of international involvement, activity, or project ongoing almost all the time. And so maybe that's partly driven by the ease of working internationally today versus the 1960s and 70s, but I have to believe it has a lot to do with the culture that we've established in the department, that we care and that we collaborate. And I think those are two really important pieces to that. The other thing that's different today than it was, and I can say this because I was a student at Purdue 30 plus years ago, is the undergraduate population. So looking at the profile of our undergraduate students in agricultural economics, in the last 8 years we have essentially gone from about 4% of our undergraduate student population from international background to about 8%. So doubled that percentage. And that's a little misleading because at the same time our student numbers have increased by over 50%. So when you sort of compare international student numbers then to international student numbers now, we've grown by about 250%. So that's changed the flavor of the classroom. It's brought an international perspective. I talked to the families of some of the students who come from other countries on occasion at graduation, and I point out to them, you know, other countries to a lot of our students from Indiana are very abstract. If they read about an earthquake in China or a plane crash in some other part of the world, it's very abstract. Until they meet somebody from that place. And so having a classmate from another country makes that real, makes those issues that they read about in the newspaper that much more concrete to them. And so I think that bringing the ideas of GTAP and bringing the ideas that others who are working internationally back to the classroom and intersecting it with that mix of students has been great. Lest you think all these students are coming from China, they're not. We have a very rich distribution of students from different parts of the world, and they're fantastic students. So the Martin Jiske Outstanding International Student Award has been awarded 4 times at Purdue. 2 of those were to students who graduated from agricultural economics. So they're fantastic students, and they're just making great accomplishments. Might shift my comments a little bit away from the department and maybe talk a little bit about our profession. And I realize we're past the food hour, but so I'll try and be short. I think most of us who have tried to work in particularly multidisciplinary contexts have discovered that economics is a very misunderstood science, and that most of the people that we try to interact with think we're either accountants or prognosticators. And the reality is that we're not really very good at either one of those. And what we are good at, though, is measurement and analysis of behavioral responses to a changing economic and policy landscape. And it's that sort of mix of measurement and analysis that I think makes us special as scientists. I think our profession over the last 30 years has probably experienced a little bit of drift in the direction of measurement at the cost of analysis. I think that's reverting now. But one of the things about this department and about GTAP is that we have maintained what I think is a very healthy balance between measurement, estimating things, and analysis, taking those estimates and asking the question of what they mean for private and public stakeholders. And that's placed GTAP, I think, in a very unique position. It's placed the entire department in a unique position. But GTAP certainly has taken advantage of this on at least 2 occasions that I can think of. You know, early on, as Tom mentioned, the focus on international trade policy and the opportunity to be in a position where GTAP and Purdue were influential in discussions about really important issues, really important social issues related to free trade and free trade policy. My major professor, again, I'll quote from him again, it's just, I guess I'm thinking back 20 years and this just put me in that frame, but he did, I remember him telling me one time that Richard Nixon was the economist's best friend, because in the 1970s, Richard Nixon froze prices and created all this natural experiment and all this unique data for economists to study, and shined an incredible spotlight on the field of economics. And so I think, you know, we're sort of in that mode again, in the sense that there's just this incredible intersection of some very important social issues and policy issues and agriculture. So food security and energy security and climate change, just to name a few. And again, we see that, you know, here's GTAP in a position to be innovative and flexible and to build collaborations and partnerships with individuals from other disciplines to start to address some of these issues and to train students in how to bring technologies and a new range of disciplines and integrate those with the GTAP model and build on the past and the history. So I think we're looking at an incredibly exciting future where GTAP has positioned not just itself but Purdue University in a very unique position with an audience of 10,000 stakeholders around the world who conduct the vast majority of the policy analysis on most of the pressing issues, and training future graduate students to have an impact on the next set of challenges, whatever they might be.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, or quick questions? No, everybody's, I think, ready. Okay. I guess just to wrap up, I've been to several institutions over my career, which and none of them I can imagine having started the GTAP project. I really do think that it has a lot to do with your land grant institution, you being a land grant institution, and your attitude towards extension. Nowhere in Australia or the United Kingdom can I imagine such a project. So credit to Purdue University. Thank you. If you'd like to all join us in the drawing room, there'll be food and a little bit more information about GTAP, and if you have any questions, please join us.